It's Friday, the 18th day of April 2025. Let's take a look at the headlines making waves in Nigeria today. We start with the Punch newspaper. The leading story: Federal government to inject 1,900 megawatt solar power into grid. Government sets 8,000 megawatt power goal by 2027. Taps private sector for grid expansion. You can find the complete story on page 2 of the Punch newspaper. Above the leading story from the left, Tinubu working remotely from overseas returns after Easter. You can find the complete story on page 28 of the Punch newspaper. Federal government to clear 2 trillion naira Genco debt by December. You can find the complete story on page 19 of the Punch newspaper. Dangote fuel pricey despite crude oil crash. You can find the complete story on page 24 of the Punch newspaper. El Rufai deserves fair treatment after supporting Tinubu. You can find the complete story on page 7 of the Punch newspaper. Below the leading story from the right, Natasha urges police to restore security as gunmen raid home. You can find the complete story on page 28 of the Punch newspaper. Emergency, Rivers administrator warns mischief makers. You can find the complete story on page 29 of the Punch newspaper. Gani Adams, others reject Southwest Sharia panels. You can find the complete story on page 10 of the newspaper. Murder trial, I found Ataga in pool of blood, says Chidinma. You can find the complete story on pages 4 and 5 of the Punch newspaper. Adeleke, Makinde meets over Oyo-Osun border tensions. You can find the complete story on page 13 of the Punch newspaper. Moving over to the next newspaper, The Vanguard. Special reports: how bandits, killer herdsmen have impacted farming and food supply. You can find the complete story on page 5 of the Vanguard newspaper. Above the leading story, Federal government to clear 2 trillion naira of 4 trillion naira Genco's debt. You can find the complete story on page 9 of the newspaper. NBA slams Rivers administrator over alleged disregard for rule of law. You can find the complete story on page 12 of the newspaper. Gunmen attack Senator Apoti Uduaghan's country home, damage property. You can find the complete story on page 6 of the Vanguard newspaper. Deep Sea, Ayiri Emami urges federal government to investigate removal of Ugborodo other Isekiri communities. You can find the complete story on page 7 of the Vanguard newspaper. Below the leading story from the right, WhatsApp to cut off millions of Nigerians using old phones. You can find the complete story on page 9 of the newspaper. Tinubu will return to Abuja after Easter holidays. You can find the complete story on page 9 of the Vanguard newspaper. 2026 World Cup still possible for Super Eagles. You can find the complete story on page 40 of the Vanguard newspaper. Malami to Almakura Group, you can't speak for CPC block. You can find the complete story on page 8 of the Vanguard newspaper. Moving over to the next newspaper, Daily Trust, the leading story: Tinubu extends stay in Europe. You can find the complete story on page 3, 4 and 5 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Above the leading story from the left, amidst 4 trillion naira electricity debt, federal government plans new subsidy model. You can find the complete story on page 23 of the Daily Trust newspaper. NGF to Plateau stakeholders, resolve differences through dialogue. You can find the complete story on page 33 of the newspaper. Don't run Arch Commission like sole administrator, Shetima tells chair. You can find the complete story on page 7 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Below the leading story, insecurity in North, military replaces theater commander in Borno. NAF airstrikes bomb terrorists in Sambisa. You can find the complete story on page 6 of the Daily Trust newspaper. Moving over to the next newspaper, Nigerian Tribune, the leading story: Presidency defends Tinubu's foreign stay amid criticism over insecurity. You can find the complete story on page 3 of the newspaper. Above the leading story from the left, CBEC's illegal unlicensed digital asset exchange, says SEC. Reps call for urgent crackdown on perpetrators of fraud. You can find the complete story on page 6 of the newspaper. Power sector got 700 billion naira boost in revenue in 2024, says Minister. Says generation capacity has hit 6,003 megawatts. Federal government to pay 2 trillion naira Genco debt by year end. You can find the complete story on page 6 of the newspaper. Below the leading story from the left, Nigerian economy recovering, says LCCI. You can find the complete story on page 8 of the newspaper. Eastern Rail Line may be ready before 2027, says NRC Managing Director. You can find the complete story on page 10 of the Tribune newspaper. Military deactivates 42 illegal refineries, naps 42 oil thieves. You can find the complete story on page 26 of the newspaper. WAEC begins 2025 May-June exam with 1.97 million candidates. You can find the complete story on page 4 of the newspaper. Gunmen attack Natasha's family house in Kogi. Investigation has begun, says police. You can find the complete story on page 10 of the newspaper. Khan attributes continuous killings in Plateau to lack of punishment for perpetrators. You can find the complete story on page 3 of the Nigerian Tribune newspaper. Moving over to the next newspaper, Business Day, the leading story. Federal government secures $1.3 billion lithium deal as confidence grows. You can find the complete story on page 31 of the newspaper. Above the leading story from the left, African airlines flock to Nigeria on single market. You can find the complete story on page 30 of the newspaper. Below the leading story from the left, Nollywood's YouTube expansion faces IP orders. You can find the complete story on page 30 of the newspaper. Easter, rising prices of tomato, pepper squeeze consumers. You can find the complete story on page 30 of the Business Day newspaper. These are the headlines making waves in Nigeria today. If any of these headlines caught your attention, do get a copy of the paper and read the complete story.